They say words are power, but Machiavelli would disagree. True power is never loud. It's never reactive. It's never emotional. It is cold. It is calculated. It is silent. When someone disrespects you, most men bark, but dogs bark because they have no teeth. The man who replies with noise is still ruled by the other. But the man who responds with silence, he forces them to look inward, to spiral, to unravel. Machiavelli believed that silence was a weapon, a silent dagger that twisted in the mind of your opponent. Long after the moment had passed, he who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command in silence. This is not about ego. This is about control, psychological. Warfare doesn't need an army, just distance, unpredictability, and a total absence of need today. You will learn the exact blueprint for silent revenge, not to hurt, but to destroy quietly, permanently, with surgical precision, because nothing cripples the ego more than being denied the opportunity to fight. Let them drown in their unspoken defeat. They say if someone throws fire at you, throw water back. But Machiavelli never carried water. He carried wind, because wind doesn't soothe fire, it suffocates it. The ones who seek to provoke you aren't asking for clarity. They're asking for control, to drag you into their chaos, to watch you burn in their theater. They insult you, bait you, lie about you, not for truth, but for reaction. And every time you answer, every time you defend, every time you explain, you've already lost in their world. Reaction is submission. You have shown that their words still control your mind, that you still want something from them: validation, apology, understanding. But Machiavelli would say, the man who explains himself is already beneath the one who made him speak. He knew this. Reaction is oxygen to the manipulator's fire. Take it away, and their flames die gasping. But silence is not weakness. Silence is a siege. It does not soothe it. Starves. It leaves them with their accusations echoing in an empty room. No reply, no audience, just them trapped in their own smoke. Unsure if they lit the fire or imagined it. The average man, silence feels passive. It feels like surrender. But to Machiavelli, silence was the final move, a cold, calculated strike that revealed the difference between a man with power and a man still begging for it. This is where most people fall. They want to be seen as right. They want to be declared innocent. They want to be understood. But Machiavelli never asked to be understood, only to be obeyed. And silence is the language of kings. You cannot both lead and explain. You cannot both dominate and defend. The moment you argue, you place yourself beside the fool. The moment you clarify, you give weight to their confusion. Machiavelli believed in control of perception, and he knew that when your enemy cannot read you, they fear you. When they can't tell if you're hurt or plotting or walking away forever, they unravel, because silence in a world screaming for attention is unsettling. It makes them question themselves, rehearse the moment, replay their insult, panic over your distance. That is the real power move, not loud dominance, but quiet collapse. Think of your emotional reaction like gold, scarce, rare, and to be earned. You wouldn't throw gold at someone who threw dirt at you. So why throw energy? Why hand over your psychological wealth to someone whose only currency is chaos? A Machiavellian mind understands this. Not everything deserves a reply. Not every insult deserves a response. Some people aren't trying to win. They're trying to distract. They want you emotional because an emotional man is a predictable man, and a predictable man is easy to control, but when you go silent, they can't predict you. When you show no shift, no twitch, no change, they begin to question if they even mattered. You deny them their role in your world, and that is the beginning of their collapse, because power isn't always taken. Sometimes it's revealed when you stop reacting. You expose how little they actually mattered to your peace, and in that revelation, the fire dies. Let them burn out while you stand motionless. Let them scream into the void while you sit at your throne. Cold, untouched, unmoved, Machiavelli would say, "It is better to be feared than loved." If you cannot be both, but here, in this silence, you are neither, you become something more dangerous, unreachable. So the next time someone throws fire, don't throw water, don't speak, don't flinch, don't even look, just take the oxygen away, remove the need to respond, starve the fire, and when it dies, you'll realize you didn't win by fighting. You won by never showing up to the battlefield. There's a lie the world tells you, that closure is maturity, that saying your piece makes you whole, that giving someone the final word is a sign of strength, but Machiavelli would never call that strength. He would call it indulgence, a performance for the guilty, an offering to the weak to him. The most strategic punishment is not confrontation, it's exile, and exile does not come with a goodbye, understand. This ego is a parasite. It feeds on reaction, relevance, recognition. It doesn't care if you love it or hate it so long as you feel something, as long as you show up, as long as you keep the performance alive. But when you isolate the ego, when you withdraw completely, without explanation, without closure, without even the dignity of farewell, the parasite begins to starve, and in that silence, it consumes itself. Machiavelli wrote, "Men sooner forget the death of their father than the loss of their inheritance." And what is more valuable to a manipulator than your attention? What is more agonizing than realizing they no longer own a single piece of your mind? The ones who betray, manipulate, or insult, they don't fear your rage. They expect it. They feed on it. It tells them they still matter. What they fear, what truly breaks them, is silence. Not the passive kind, not sulking, but the cold, total removal of your presence. The kind that feels like being cut off from a kingdom you once ruled. In Machiavellian terms, you are the throne, and your absence is their exile. You don't explain, you don't hint, you vanish, and in doing so, you force them to live in the haunted halls of their own ego, wondering what they did, replaying every moment, every word, every lie they thought would work, until the silence becomes unbearable, and that is when the ego begins to collapse. This isn't about ghosting. This is not immaturity. This is not revenge. This is psychological warfare at its most elegant. You don't destroy them with insult. You don't outsmart them with words. You destroy them by making them irrelevant, unworthy of your time, your breath, your presence, because the truth is, most people don't want reconciliation. They want reassurance. They want you to say it's okay, that they were justified, that they didn't really fail you, that you still care, that they still have power. But Machiavelli believed that true punishment should come not from rage, but from absence. He saw that the most brutal rulers didn't strike down their enemies in public. They banished them from the court, silently, without warning. No more seat at the table, no more roll in. The narrative just gone, and in that vacuum, the ego screams. When you isolate the manipulator, you turn their mind into a prison cell. They become both inmate and jailer, replaying the silence, interpreting your disappearance, inventing reasons, assigning blame, none of which you ever confirm or deny. That's the cruelty of isolation, the unknown, the lack of closure, the unanswered question. You let them rot in the silence. Not because you're cruel, but because you're finished, and your silence isn't a game, it's a verdict. One they can't appeal. Let's be clear, this isn't for everyone. This is not for the emotionally weak. This is not for the man who still seeks apology, who still needs to be understood. This is for the man who is ready to rule his energy like a kingdom, to guard his mind like a fortress, to protect his peace like a bloodline, because once you master the art of strategic isolation, you begin to see people for what they are, either assets or liabilities, and liabilities are not to be explained to. They are to be removed. You don't hurt them, you don't chase them, you don't fix them, you just vanish quietly, permanently, without a trace of the man they used to control. And here's the Machiavellian truth. They expected a battle, you gave them a void. They wanted a final word, you gave them silence. They wanted relevance, you made them invisibles. So isolate them, not with anger, but with distance, not with cruelty, but with indifference. Remove their name from your life like a stain, because nothing starves the ego faster than being unworthy of reply. This is not about punishing them. This is about reclaiming power, and in Machiavellian silence, that's exactly what you become. Not angry, not emotional, not reactive, just gone, and more powerful than ever. Most people speak because they want to be understood. Machiavelli spoke only when it served power. He understood a brutal truth. The moment you explain yourself, you reduce yourself. You see, explanations are rarely for clarity. They are for validation. When you say, "Here's why I'm leaving. Here's why I didn't respond. Here's why I'm hurt," what you're really saying is, "Please see me. Please understand. Please agree that I am justified." But Machiavelli would call that a weakness disguised as logic, because the one who explains has already made himself smaller. He has invited the other person into his palace, let them sit on his throne just to ask for emotional approval. To Machiavelli, this was never mercy, it was miscalculation. Let's go deeper. The manipulator thrives on two things: prediction and persuasion. If they know what you'll say next, they know how to twist it. If they can get you to explain, they can get you to apologize. And if they can get you to explain before you act, they can talk you out of acting altogether. That's why you never warn. You don't say, "If this happens again, I'll leave." You just leave. You don't say, "This is your last chance." You just stop showing up. No signal, no ceremony. Just action, because a warning gives them time to prepare, to manipulate, to spin. And Machiavelli taught that you should never strike until your opponent is too disoriented to recover. A king does not explain his decisions to his court. He signs the order and it is carried out. A general does not inform the enemy of his next move. He strikes from the shadows. This is the power of nonverbal dominance, of unspoken rules, of moves made in silence. Your absence speaks more than your presence ever could. And when you do not explain that absence, it creates mystery, fear, obsession. They begin to ask themselves, "What did I do? Was it this moment or that one? Why didn't they say something? Why now? Why like this?" And the answer never comes. That's the point. You don't close the door with a speech. You close it with finality. You don't write a goodbye letter. You disappear mid-sentence, mid-conversation, mid-connection. Best the care. Best power move is to make them question not just what you did, but who you are. Now explanations anchor you to your old identity, to the version of you that was still accessible, still unsure, still explaining himself to be accepted. But when you say nothing, you become untouchable. You become the unknown. And the unknown is always feared. Machiavelli believed fear could be more reliable than love. But even more powerful than fear is unpredictability. You are not cold because you hate them. You are cold because you've evolved. You no longer participate in cycles that require you to prove yourself. You no longer grant access to those who failed your unspoken test. The man who never warns cannot be played. The man who never explains cannot be disrespected. So let them wonder. Let them invent their own stories. Let them apologize for things you never accused them of. Let them spiral into guilt, confusion, and paranoia, all while you remain still, calm, absent. And when they ask others what happened, no one can answer, because you said nothing, because you warned no one, because you moved in silence. Like a shadow king Machiavelli would tell you, the final word belongs to the one who says the least. Let that be you. It tells you to explain, to perform, to prove. It whispers, what will they think? Every time you walk away, it demands that you win arguments even when the war is beneath you. It's not your intuition. It's not your logic. It's the audience, the imagined audience, the invisible crowd watching your every move, judging, waiting, reacting. Not in real life, but in your mind. Friends, exes, co-workers, enemies, strangers. Their imagined eyes shape your posture. Their imagined opinions edit your words. Their imagined disappointment makes you overthink everything. And this audience is the enemy of your power. Machiavelli would say, you are not free if you still act for approval. Because as long as that internal audience exists, you are performing. You are not leading. You are not ruling. You are adjusting your crown based on the applause of people who don't even matter, or worse, don't even exist. This is what makes silence so difficult for most men. It's not the other person they're afraid of. It's the imagined crowd in their head, the voice that says, if you don't respond, you'll look weak. If you don't defend yourself, they'll think you're guilty. If you disappear, they'll think they won. But the only thing they win is attention. And Machiavelli understood attention as currency. He believed that to rule the mind, one must first kill the need to be seen. This section is not about how others control you. It's about how you control yourself when you think others are watching. Because the truth is, you can walk away from a manipulator and still be shackled to their voice inside your head. You can cut someone off in silence and still replay what they said at night. You can exile them from your life, but if they still have access to your thoughts, you haven't won. You've only relocated the battlefield. That real withdrawal begins internally. You must destroy the version of you that still needs to be understood, the version that still imagines delivering the perfect speech, the version that wins the argument in his mind 5 years later. That man is not powerful. He is haunted. Machiavelli never asked to be understood. He never begged to be seen as kind, as good, as fair. He asked only to be respected or removed. You do not owe anyone a performance. Not your ex, not your family, not your enemies, not your former friends. especially not the faceless audience you've created to justify staying small. Staying emotional, staying explainable. When you realize this, you reclaim the most dangerous kind of power, internal sovereignty. You are no longer a man ruled by perception. You are a man ruled by principle, and your principle is silence, not as a trick, not as revenge, as a default state of power. Think of a lion. It doesn't roar when offended. It doesn't announce when it walks away. It leaves quiet, majestic, untouchable. It knows its strength. It does not need witnesses to validate it. That's how you must move, like a king who no longer needs the applause of the court, like a shadow who does not ask the light for permission to vanish. Because when you kill the audience inside your mind, you kill the last barrier between you and peace. You stop debating ghosts. You stop justifying absence. You stop explaining your silence, and suddenly, that silence becomes unbreakable. You are no longer defending anything. You are no longer responding to imagined critics. You are no longer feeding an audience that only exists because you refuse to fire them. The crowd is gone. The noise is gone. The weight is gone now. Your silence is not just a tool. It is your throne. It is your shield. It is your legacy. And from here on, the only voice that matters is your own. Most people fear confrontation, but Machiavelli understood asterisk. They fear reflection even more asterisk. You think silence is passive. You think saying nothing means you've done nothing, but that's not how the human mind works. When you speak, you direct their attention. When you explain, you give them something to resist. But when you go silent, you leave them alone with themselves. And that's where the damage begins. Machiavelli believed that power did not always require force. It only required psychological advantage. Silence is that advantage because silence is a mirror, and most people spend their entire lives avoiding mirrors, avoiding themselves, distracting, performing, seducing, manipulating, anything but sitting still and looking inward. When you go silent after betrayal, after manipulation, after disrespect, you don't abandon the conversation. You turn it around. You place the entire spotlight on them, and in that spotlight, they begin to sweat. They ask themselves questions, not because you forced them to, but because your silence left space for doubt, for guilt, for shame. Was I wrong? Did I go too far? Why aren't they responding? The moment you stop feeding the ego, it feeds on itself. This is the psychological warfare Machiavelli admired. When a ruler does not punish with violence, but lets the enemy collapse under the weight of his own conscience. To Machiavelli, the best executions happened in the mind, and silence is the executioner. You may think they don't care, that your silence goes unnoticed, but people don't notice sound. They notice its absence. And if they're used to controlling you through emotion, then your silence isn't just strange, it's agonizing. It tells them everything they need to know without you saying a word, because when you don't yell, they can't call you bitter. When you don't explain, they can't argue back. When you don't chase, they can't reject you again. And when you don't respond, they are left responding to themselves. Let that happen. Let them talk to the empty space. Let them send messages you never open. Let them spiral in the silence they created. This is how you destroy ego asterisk, not with violence, not with revenge, but with a mirror. They can't break asterisk, because people can fight your words, but they can't fight their own conscience forever. And if they have any sliver of humanity left, Your absence will echo louder than anything you could have said. It will replay in their minden the quiet moments in the middle of the night, in the conversations they avoid with others, in the eyes of their next victim. And here's the truth. Some people won't reflect. Some people will blame you, call you cold or toxic or heartless. That's fine. Let them tell their story, but don't flinch. Don't return. Don't explain, because even if they don't admit it, they'll feel the weight of your absence every time they lie about it. And if they ever wake up in the middle of the night, realizing what they did, and no longer have access to you, that silence becomes their prison. This is not cruelty. It is consequenced to Machiavelli. Cruelty was action without purpose, but silence has purpose. It reveals, it reflects, it humbles, it forces the mask to fall. Because most people are not afraid of being hated. They are afraid of being seen, and silence makes them visible to themselves. So the next time someone plays you, insults you, violates your trust, don't argue, don't scream, don't write the perfect message, don't say, "You hurt me." Don't beg for understanding, just step back and go silent. Watch the guilt bloom in their absence. Watch the questions grow like vines. Watch the mask slip. Machiavelli would say, men are driven by two things, love or fear. But when silence is used properly, they feel both. Love becomes memory. Fear becomes the void you leave behind. That is your real power, not in being right, not in being heard, but in becoming the last thing they think about long after you've disappeared. So let them stare into that silence like a mirror. Let them face what they did, what they lost, what they'll never have access to again, not because you punished them, but because you left them alone long enough to punish themselves. Power isn't just in what happens, it's in how it's interpreted, and the one who controls interpretation controls the world. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He didn't just write about war, he wrote about the frame, the invisible lens through which people see events. And if you let your enemy control the frame, they can make you look guilty while being innocent, weak while being right, desperate while being free. That's why your silence isn't just revenge. It's a rewrite when you respond. They control the tempo when you argue. They own the narrative. But when you vanish without a word, when you refuse to defend, to explain, to clarify, you take back control. Suddenly, they are no longer in charge of how the story ends. They are left guessing. Was he hurt? Or just done? Was this weakness? Or was this war? Was it rejection? Or was I simply replaced? This is the power of the unspoken. Silence becomes ambiguity, and ambiguity is lethal, because the human mind cannot tolerate unfinished stories. The brain will create an ending, whether it's real or not, and when you say nothing, you force them to write their own guilt. Let them build the ending in their head. Let them paint you as the villain, if they must. But here's the truth. They don't believe their own narrative. Not fully, because if they did, they wouldn't keep checking if you saw their story. They wouldn't keep watching your silence. They wouldn't panic every time you don't respond. Machiavelli knew that silence allows space for others to project their deepest fears and regrets. And once that projection begins, the frame begins to fracture. Now, they're not sure if they were right. They start questioning their version. They re-edit the memory. And once they start doubting the past, you've already rewritten it. This is why you never explain, because to explain is to accept their version of events and attempt to fix it. But the man who explains is still reacting. The man who rewrites doesn't respond at all. Instead, he controls. The frame silence is the art of moving the battlefield. They want a debate? Deny them the war. They want closure? Deny them the script. They want to be the hero of their story? Deny them the ending. Now they're trapped in an unfinished scene, a half-written lie. A spotlight with no audience. You didn't win the argument. You erased it. You didn't defend your name. You took it off their tongue. This is Machiavellian authority. It doesn't scream for justice. It controls perception. It understands that people believe not what is true, but what is repeated, and silence stops repetition. It freezes the narrative mid-sentence. Let them tell others what happened. You remain silent. You remain still. The moment you break that stillness, you surrender the mystery. But as long as you say nothing, they fear that you know more than you ever said. And fear rewrites everything. Because in the absence of information, perception becomes weaponized, and the one who controls perception walks away with the crown. Machiavelli would say, appearances are everything, control them. And truth becomes irrelevant. So control the frame, choose silence. Let their lies echo without resistance until the echo begins to unravel itself. Because the world remembers not what was said, but what was felt. And they'll remember your silence more than any statement you could have made. The loudest man in the room is always the weakest. Not because he lacks strength, but because he needs you to know he has it. And need is the death of power. Machiavelli didn't trust noise. He trusted control. Quiet, invisible, untouchable control. Because the man who speaks too much reveals his strategy. The man who reacts too quickly reveals his insecurity. And the man who needs to be heard has already lost the war. True power is never loud. It doesn't announce. It doesn't beg. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists like gravity, silent, inescapable. Final look at the most feared leaders in history. The ones who ruled without resistance. The ones who inspired loyalty and terror with a glance, a gesture, a pause. Their power was not volume. It was presence. It was the kind of stillness that made others question themselves. The kind of silence that rewrote the temperature of a room. To Machiavelli, this was the highest form of strategy. Becoming unreadable, unpredictable, a force that cannot be manipulated because it cannot be measured. When you're loud, people prepare for you. When you're emotional, they know how to provoke you. But when you're cold, still, unfazed, they fear you because they don't know what you'll do next. This is the psychology of dominance. Not chaos, not noise, but calm control. Think of a sniper. He does not yell across the battlefield. He waits, still patient. And when he moves, it's over. One shot, one decision, one outcome. No negotiation, no announcement. This is how you must operate as a man of precision. Not performance in your relationships, in your business, in your revenge. You do not need to show anger to prove you were wronged. You do not need to raise your voice to be respected. You do not need to warn them you are done. You simply leave. You simply succeed. You simply disappear. And in doing so, you speak louder than any confrontation ever could. Ones who crave power but haven't earned it will always chase noise. They need to be heard, seen, praised, but the man who knows his worth doesn't need the echo. He becomes the weight in every room, the presence that bends reality without raising a hand. This is Machiavellian elegance, to be feared, but not loud, to be desired, but not available, to be present, but not accessible. And here's the irony. The less you say, the more they talk about you. The less you reveal, The more they try to read you, the colder your silence, the more their ego overheats, because silence doesn't just protect your energy, it creates myth. People can't obsess over a man who explains himself, but they will obsess over the man they don't understand, and that's the man you must become. Not emotional, not reactive, not desperate to prove anything. Just there like a locked vault in the center of a storm, surrounded by chaos, untouched by all of it. This is the final shift. From reaction to stillness, from force to presence, from being heard to being felt. Machiavelli would say, power is preserved not by the sword alone, but by the perception of invincibility. And there is nothing more invincible than a man who does not flinch, does not respond, does not need. So stop explaining, stop announcing, stop performing. Let others waste their energy on appearances. You move like smoke, you hold your posture, you speak only when it multiplies your power and not a moment before. Because now, your silence isn't just a tactic, it's who you are. It's your nature. It's your throne. You are no longer playing the social game. You are the man they can't read, can't reach, can't replace, and they will feel your absence louder than they ever heard your voice. Now the air is still, the noise has faded, the arguments stopped echoing, the applause, the insults, the accusations. All silenced because you didn't speak, you didn't fight, you didn't perform. You vanished quiet, calculated, complete. This was never about revenge, it was about clarity. Never about being right, only about being free. You gave them the greatest punishment imaginable. No explanation, no closure, no return, and now they sit in rooms you once lit up, rewriting the story, replaying the moment, reconsidering their role. Let them. That is their consequence, not your concern. You have reclaimed your energy, reclaimed your image, reclaimed your mind from the theater of validation and noise. There is no need to correct their story, no need to respond to their guilt, no need to be seen again by eyes that failed to see you the first time. From this day forward, your silence is not emptiness, it is command. Your absence is not avoidance, it is strategy. Your indifference is not numbness, it is discipline. You have become the echo they can't escape, the absence they feel more than any presence, the storm that left, but left the sky forever changed. Machiavelli would say, it is better to be feared than loved. If you cannot be both, but fear is only the beginning, the real legacy is mystery. So walk away, not with words, not with warnings, just stillness. Let them wonder where you went. Let them talk to the silence. Let them try to fill the void they created, because silence is your legacy now, and the game, it no longer includes them.